Ethan stared out of the cockpit window, watching the stars pass by like distant lights in the endless void of space. He was used to the lonely journey, the quiet hum of his small transport ship, the Cinder, as it made its way across the galaxy. A low-level captain of a low-level freighter. His job was simple: pick up cargo, deliver it, and get paid. Nothing complicated, nothing special. At least, that's how it had always been. But today was different. A new job had come through, one that offered a sum of credits far larger than anything he had ever earned before. Ethan wasn't one to turn down good money, even if it came from a suspicious source. The job was simple: transport a mysterious cargo to a remote system. He didn't ask questions. As long as it paid, he didn't care what it was. But as the Cinder dropped out of hyperdrive and neared the coordinates, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Something didn't feel right. The station where he was supposed to deliver the cargo was abandoned, a rundown outpost floating in the emptiness of space. No ships were docked, no signs of life, only the dim flicker of the station's old lights as it floated silently in the dark. Ethan maneuvered his ship closer, setting it down on the station's landing bay. His heart beat faster, a sense of unease rising in his chest. As he powered down the engines and made his way to the cargo hold, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something bigger than just a delivery was happening. The door to the cargo hold slid open with a hiss, and Ethan stepped inside, ready to check on the shipment. What he saw made his stomach churn. The cargo wasn't just crates of goods like he had expected. It was people. Strange, shackled beings, their bodies covered in tattered cloth and strange markings. There were 5 of them, 3 males and 2 females, each one lying on the cold metal floor, unconscious but alive. Their faces were twisted in pain, and their breathing was shallow. The air in the hold was thick, smelling faintly of something metallic. Ethan's first instinct was to check the security logs to see what kind of cargo he was dealing with. He swiped at the control panel next to the door, his fingers trembling slightly. The record showed the standard cargo. No specifics, just a vague description that didn't match what he was seeing. He looked at the beings in front of him. They weren't ordinary. They weren't just passengers or slaves. There was something different about them, something dangerous. He stepped closer to one of them, a tall, thin female with dark purple skin and glowing eyes. She looked peaceful in her unconscious state, but there was a power in her presence. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. These weren't ordinary beings. They were something else, something he couldn't yet understand. He touched the side of her arm gently, and to his surprise, she stirred, her eyes flickering open. Where am I?" Her voice was soft, but filled with a strange, haunting quality. She struggled against the shackles that held her in place, but there was no strength left in her. Her gaze met Ethan's, and for a moment, their eyes locked. You can't help me. You don't know what you're dealing with." Ethan quickly stepped back, confused and unsure of what to do. The woman's words echoed in his mind. What was she talking about? He looked around the cargo hold, unsure whether he should act or if he should just follow the instructions he'd been given. He didn't want to get involved in whatever this was, but something inside him, something deep down, felt like he couldn't walk away. These weren't just slaves. They were something far more important. The woman's voice was strained as she spoke again. "Please, don't let them take us." She looked terrified, but her eyes held a silent plea. "You don't understand what they want us for, what they're going to do to us." Ethan's mind raced. Who were they? Who had he agreed to deliver this cargo to? And why were these beings so important? He knew he wasn't prepared for this. But one thing was clear. He couldn't just leave them here. Not after hearing her plea. He made a quick decision. He couldn't just leave them to their fate. But what could he do? He wasn't a fighter. He was a transport captain, not a hero. And yet something in his gut told him that if he turned away now, he would never forgive himself. "Hold on," Ethan muttered, more to himself than to the alien. "I'm going to get you out of here." The alien blinked, her eyes widening as though she hadn't expected him to respond. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, her voice low. "You don't know what they'll do to you." Ethan didn't answer. He turned quickly, heading for the door. He needed to find out more. He needed to figure out who was behind all of this. If he could learn the truth, maybe he could find a way to help. But first, he had to get these aliens out of their chains. He reached into his cargo bay and pulled out the tools he had for simple repairs. He didn't have much, just a small set of cutters and some rope, but it would have to do. He began working on the chains, carefully cutting them open, one by one. The aliens stirred but remained silent. There was no time to waste. He didn't know how much longer they had before someone came looking for them. As Ethan freed the last of the aliens from their chains, he heard a distant sound, the unmistakable hum of a ship's engines. His blood ran cold. Someone was coming. The smugglers were here. He quickly ushered the freed aliens into the small holding area of his ship. He didn't know where they would go or how they would survive, but he couldn't turn back now. The stakes were too high. Whatever the smugglers were planning with these beings, it wasn't good. He had to get them out of here, before it was too late. Ethan powered up the engines and pulled the cinder away from the station. As the ship blasted into space, the cold, lonely stars were his only company. But now, he was no longer just a simple transport captain. He had a new mission, one that would take him deeper into a world of secrets, danger, and betrayal. The aliens were only the beginning. What lay ahead would test him in ways he never imagined. As the ship sped away, Ethan glanced back at the aliens in the hold. He couldn't help but wonder who they were and why they were so important. But one thing was for certain. His life would never be the same again. Ethan sat in the cockpit of the Cinder, his hands gripping the controls. The stars blurred outside as he pushed the ship into faster-than-light travel, a sense of urgency driving his every move. He didn't know who was after him, but the smugglers weren't going to let this cargo slip away without a fight. As he checked the ship's navigation systems, he kept an eye on the ship's internal cameras, watching the alien slaves in the hold. The female alien, the one he had first freed, was sitting on the floor, her legs crossed, staring out into space with a look of quiet sadness in her eyes. She hadn't spoken much since he freed her and the others, but Ethan noticed that she was the most alert of them all. Her gaze never left the stars, as though she was searching for something. He wondered what her story was, what kind of being she really was. She wasn't like any other creature he'd encountered before, and the strange markings on her skin only deepened the mystery. "Hey," Ethan said, trying to break the silence. "I need to know what's going on. Who are you people? Why are they after you?" She didn't answer right away, as though she was weighing whether or not to speak. Ethan wasn't sure whether she even understood him, but he had to try. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was soft, yet full of weight and wisdom. "We are known as the Xalcor," she said, her eyes never leaving the window. "We are a warrior race, feared and respected across the galaxy. We have fought many battles, survived countless wars, but we are not immortal. The ones who took us are not just smugglers. They are mercenaries working for someone much more dangerous." Ethan frowned, unsure of what to make of her words. "Who are they working for?" "The warlord," she replied with a bitter tone. "A being of unimaginable power. He seeks to use us to further his plans, plans that could change the balance of the galaxy forever. He will stop at nothing to see us enslaved or destroyed." The weight of her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had already known the cargo wasn't ordinary, but now he realized just how dangerous it really was. These aliens weren't just slaves, they were powerful warriors, and someone wanted to use them for something much worse than just profit. Ethan's mind raced. He could feel the pull of the money, the credit he was promised for completing the delivery. It was a tempting offer. He had debts to pay, and his ship wasn't going to maintain itself. But everything he had learned in the past few hours told him that accepting the smuggler's job had been a mistake. These aliens were more than just prisoners. They were key to something bigger, something he couldn't fully understand yet. The female alien, Lyra as Ethan had come to call her, finally turned her gaze towards him. Her eyes were sharp, intense, as though she could see through him. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into," she said quietly. "These mercenaries will stop at nothing to get us back. They'll kill anyone who stands in their way, including you." Ethan swallowed hard. The words stung, but deep down, he knew she was right. If he delivered them to the smugglers, there was no telling what would happen next. He didn't know if he could trust Lyra or her people, but he did know that if he helped the smugglers, he would become part of something much darker than he had ever imagined. "I can't just leave you," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words were out before he could stop them, and as soon as he said them, he realized how much they meant. He had always prided himself on being a simple man, a man who didn't get involved in things he didn't understand, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too deep to back out. Lyra's eyes softened, but she didn't smile. "You don't have to help us," she said. "But if you choose to, Know that your life will never be the same. You will become a target. They will hunt you down. No place will be safe. Ethan didn't reply at first. His mind was spinning with the possibilities. He could continue on the original course and deliver the aliens to the smugglers. They would be sold to the highest bidder, probably to the warlord, and the smugglers would get their profit. Ethan would get his payment, and life would go on. But something inside him told him that there was no going back. His gut told him that this wasn't just a delivery anymore. This was a choice between right and wrong, between doing what was easy and doing what was right. "I need to think," he muttered, more to himself than to Lyra. He paced back and forth in the cockpit, trying to clear his head. Outside, the stars streaked by in a blur as the ship hummed through the quiet darkness of space. The silence was deafening, and it gave him too much time to think about everything that had happened. The smugglers, the aliens, Lyra's words, everything felt like it was building to something he couldn't yet see. Then, as if on cue, an alarm blared from the console. Ethan's heart jumped in his chest as he turned to see the flashing red warning. A ship, big and fast, was coming up behind them. "That's them," Lyra said, her voice calm, but filled with urgency. "They found us." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had hoped he could outrun them. But now it seemed that hope was gone. He had no choice but to face the truth. The smugglers were coming for them, and there was nowhere to hide. The decision had to be made, and it had to be made now. Would he fight for these aliens, for Lyra, and risk everything? Or would he hand them over to the smugglers and walk away with the credits, leaving his conscience behind? Ethan felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him, harder than any cargo he had ever carried. Time was running out, and the stars outside seemed to mock him, reminding him of how small and insignificant he was in the vastness of space. "Okay," he said finally, his voice filled with resolve. "I'm not delivering you to them. We're going to fight." Ethan's hands gripped the controls tighter as the ship's alarms blared in his ears. The smugglers were closing in fast, their ship a dark silhouette against the backdrop of distant stars. The speed at which they approached told Ethan that they were no ordinary smugglers. This was something bigger, something dangerous. "Get ready." Lyra's voice cut through the tension, calm but filled with urgency. "They'll be on us any minute. You need to outrun them." Ethan's heart raced. He wasn't a fighter. He was a transporter. His ship wasn't built for combat. The Cinder was fast, but it wasn't made to withstand an all-out attack. Still, he had no choice. He couldn't give up now. His mind raced as he slammed the throttle forward, pushing the ship to its limits. The stars outside stretched into bright streaks as the Cinder shot into hyperspace, leaving the smugglers in the dust, at least for now. But Lyra's voice brought him back to reality. "They'll track us. They have technology we can't outrun for long. You need to find a place to hide." Ethan's eyes darted across the console, scanning for any nearby systems. He needed a place to hide, a place far enough off the beaten path that the smugglers wouldn't be able to find him. His fingers flew over the controls as he pulled up a map of the surrounding systems. Then he spotted it, an uncharted moon, a desolate place far from any major trade routes. "We're going there," Ethan said with determination, setting the coordinates. "It's our best shot." As the Cinder veered off course, he couldn't help but wonder about the aliens he was now responsible for. Lyra and the others seemed so alien, so different. They were nothing like the people he had dealt with before. Their culture, their history, he had no idea what it was. But one thing was clear. These aliens were important, and the smugglers weren't just after them for a quick profit. They were after something far more sinister. As he made the jump to hyperspace, the pressure in his chest eased slightly. They were safe, for now, but Lyra's words still echoed in his mind. "They will stop at nothing to find us." Ethan glanced back at the hole where the aliens rested, their eyes darting nervously as the ship rattled with the hum of hyperspace travel. It was clear they were still unsure of what was happening. They didn't trust him, not yet, but that wasn't important right now. What mattered was getting them to safety. The Cinder sped through the void, its engine humming steadily. Ethan's thoughts were consumed by the smugglers, by the warlord, and by what they all wanted with these aliens. Lyra had said they were warriors, powerful beings feared across the galaxy. But what did that mean? And why were the smugglers so determined to track them down? Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was tangled in something much bigger than himself. He had been a simple captain, a man who just wanted to get by. But now, He was caught in the middle of a galaxy-spanning conspiracy, with no idea of who the real enemy was. Was it the smugglers, the warlord, or something even more dangerous? The ship suddenly jolted, snapping Ethan out of his thoughts. He grabbed the controls, his pulse racing. "What was that?" he asked, his voice tight. Lyra's eyes flickered as she stood up, moving toward the cockpit. "They found us," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "They've activated a tracking device." Ethan's heart sank. He had hoped they would have more time. He had hoped they could make it to the moon before the smugglers caught up with them. But it seemed hope was a fleeting thing in this part of space. The smugglers' ship was close now, very close, and as Ethan looked at the radar, he saw that they weren't alone. There were multiple ships closing in on their position. "Shit," Ethan muttered, his mind racing. "We need to get to that moon now." He slammed the controls forward, pushing the Cinder to its maximum speed. The ship jolted again as the smugglers' ships fired warning shots, the blasts narrowly missing the hull. Ethan gritted his teeth, knowing that if they didn't make it to the moon soon, they would be sitting ducks. Lyra moved quickly, her movements sharp and precise. "We'll need to make a hard turn to avoid them," she said. "They'll try to box us in. If we can get close enough to the moon's gravity field, we might be able to lose them." Ethan nodded, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He wasn't used to this kind of pressure. He wasn't used to being hunted. But he didn't have a choice. He had to protect the aliens. He had to protect Lyra. The smugglers' ships were closing in fast, and the Cinder was beginning to shake under the strain. Ethan gritted his teeth as he made the hard turn, the ship veering dangerously close to the moon's surface. The smugglers followed, but they were too slow to make the same sharp turn. Ethan's heart pounded as the Cinder dipped lower, heading for the dark side of the moon. The smugglers fired again, but the shots missed. The Cinder plunged into the moon's shadow, disappearing into the darkness. "We did it," Ethan breathed, his hands trembling on the controls. "We're safe, for now." But even as the ship slowed and the alarms faded, a nagging feeling settled in Ethan's gut. This wasn't over. The smugglers wouldn't give up so easily, and the warlord was still out there, somewhere, waiting. Ethan glanced back at Lyra. "We need to figure out what's really going on. Who are they working for? What do they want with you?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window, staring out at the cold, dark surface of the moon. "They want us for war," she said finally, her voice quiet. "They want to use us as soldiers. Soldiers in a war that could destroy everything. The warlord plans to conquer the galaxy, and we are his weapon." Ethan's mind raced. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. The stakes were higher than ever. And now, he had a choice to make. Would he continue to run, hiding from the danger, or would he stand and fight, risking everything to stop a war that could tear the galaxy apart? The choice was his, but the path ahead was uncertain. And Ethan knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever be the same again. The Cinder floated in the shadow of the desolate moon, the silence of space wrapping around it like a heavy blanket. Ethan's eyes scanned the stars outside, his mind still racing with the events of the past few hours. They had made it out of the smugglers' chase. Barely, but the threat wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. Lyra was still at the window, her dark eyes searching the endless void outside. The others in the hold were quiet, restless. They knew the danger wasn't gone. They could feel it in the air. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was happening, something far beyond what he had originally bargained for. "Lyra," Ethan said, his voice breaking the stillness, "I need you to tell me everything. The warlord, the smugglers, why do they want you? Why are you so important?" She turned slowly, her face serious. "We're not just survivors. We are warriors, yes, but we have something much more valuable, the key to stopping the warlord." Ethan raised an eyebrow, confusion clouding his thoughts. "The key? What do you mean?" Lyra walked toward him, her gaze never leaving his. "The Xalcor are not just a warrior race. We have a power, a gift, that was passed down through generations. A power that the warlord needs in order to rule the galaxy." Ethan's mind spun as the weight of her words sank in. "You mean, you could stop him? You have the power to fight him." "Not alone," Lyra replied, her voice somber. "We need to work together. But it's not just about power. It's about the ancient technology buried deep within our people. A technology the warlord has spent years trying to find. And now, He believes we have the last pieces of it. Ethan blinked, trying to process it all. So you're telling me that you're not just fighting for your freedom. You're fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. Yes, Lyra said, nodding gravely. The warlord plans to use the technology to create a weapon that will give him control over all the stars. His armies will be unstoppable, and no one will stand in his way. Ethan could feel his chest tightening. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. He wasn't just helping a group of runaway slaves. He was caught in the middle of a galactic war, and the stakes were higher than ever. We can't let that happen, Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. Lyra's eyes softened for a moment. I didn't want to drag you into this, but now that you're involved, we don't have much choice. Ethan looked out at the barren moon. They were far from any major systems, but he knew it wouldn't be long before the smugglers found them again. And when they did, the stakes would rise even higher. We need a plan, Ethan said, turning back to Lyra. We can't keep running. We need to fight back. Lyra nodded. I agree, but we can't do it alone. There are others who are fighting against the warlord, resistance groups across the galaxy. If we can find them, we may have a chance. Ethan's mind raced. Resistance groups. He didn't know where to begin looking, but he knew that they needed allies. Alone, they couldn't stand a chance. The warlord had armies at his disposal, but if they could join forces with others who were fighting back, maybe they could make a stand. All right, Ethan said, his voice steady. We'll find them. We'll fight back. But we can't wait here forever. We need to move. Lyra gave a small nod. We'll move quickly, but we can't underestimate the smugglers. They'll be back soon, and when they come, they'll come with everything they have. Ethan turned to the controls, his fingers flying over the keys as he plotted their next course. They needed to find a safe haven, a place to regroup and plan their next move. He keyed in the coordinates for a nearby system, a place rumored to be home to a group of resistance fighters. As the cinder powered up, Ethan glanced at Lyra, who stood behind him, her eyes filled with quiet resolve. She was a warrior, and she was right. They couldn't afford to wait. The warlord was coming, and they had to act fast. The ship jerked into motion as the engines roared to life, and they sped away from the moon. The smugglers' ships were still out there, but Ethan was determined to shake them. He had to believe that they could make it. The silence of space stretched around them as they made their way through the stars. Ethan couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. He had always lived his life on his own terms, but now he was part of something much bigger than himself. And as much as he hated the feeling of being caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand, he knew there was no turning back. The galaxy was changing, and Ethan was now in the heart of it. The cinder cut through the stars, its engines humming as it sped toward the uncharted system. Ethan sat in the cockpit, eyes focused on the navigation screen. Lyra stood behind him, watching the stars in silence. The tension between them had settled into a quiet understanding, but the weight of their situation hung in the air like a storm about to break. Ethan glanced over at Lyra. Are you sure this resistance group can help us? Lyra nodded, her gaze unwavering. They're the best chance we have. They've been fighting the warlord for years, but they're scattered. We'll need to find them quickly. Ethan didn't like the uncertainty in her voice. He had never been in a fight like this. He had always been a transporter, moving cargo from one place to another. Now he was in the middle of a war he didn't fully understand, but he couldn't back out now. Not after everything that had happened. The stars stretched before them, a never-ending sea of light and darkness. The system they were heading for was small, a place few ships ever visited. Ethan hoped it was enough to shake the smugglers. The warlord's forces were powerful, and they wouldn't stop hunting until they had what they wanted. But as the cinder approached the system, something fell off. The radar was clear, too clear. There should have been more ships, more activity, but everything was eerily quiet. Ethan frowned. This doesn't feel right. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. We'll be fine. They'll be here. Just keep going. Ethan nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. Something about this whole situation didn't add up. If the resistance was as strong as Lyra had said, why wasn't there more activity around their location? Suddenly, the silence was broken by a blip on the radar. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he saw several ships appear, emerging from behind the distant moons of the system. They were fast, their sleek designs unmistakable. But they weren't smugglers. They were fighters Fighters that looked like they meant business. "Looks like we found them," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. Lyra's eyes flickered with a mixture of relief and wariness. "Let's hope they're friendly." The ships closed in on the Cinder, their engines glowing bright against the dark expanse of space. Ethan held his breath, unsure of what would happen next. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't prepared for this. But as the ships formed around them, a calm, steady voice came over the communication system. "This is Captain Jorik of the Resistance Fleet. Identify yourself." Ethan quickly responded, his voice firm. "This is Ethan Stone, Captain of the Cinder. I have several aliens aboard. Zalcor, we need your help. The warlord is after us." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Ethan thought they might be rejected. But then the voice came back. "We've been tracking the warlord's forces for months," Captain Jorik said. "We know who you are. You've got Zalcor aboard, and we've heard rumors about them. It's not just the warlord who's after them. There are others." Ethan's stomach tightened. Others. Others who want the power that Zalcor possess. Captain Jorik explained. "But don't worry. We've fought the warlord and his allies before. We'll protect you." The communication cut off, and moments later, the Cinder was surrounded by several smaller ships. They were escorted into a hidden station, a place Ethan could only describe as a refuge in the middle of nowhere. The station was well armed, but the atmosphere inside was tense. People moved quickly, going about their business as if this was just another day in the fight for survival. Lyra seemed to relax slightly, her posture shifting as if she were finally allowing herself to feel safe. But even so, she remained alert, her eyes scanning the room as they moved through the station. "This way," Lyra said, leading Ethan through the narrow hallways. "We'll meet with Captain Jorik." As they entered a small meeting room, Captain Jorik stood up to greet them. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short cropped hair and a face that showed the wear of too many battles. His eyes were sharp, and there was no mistaking the authority in his stance. "Captain Stone," Jorik said, his voice low but welcoming. "It's good to finally meet you in person. And you must be Lyra. I'm glad you made it." Lyra nodded. "We need your help, Jorik. The warlord is closing in, and we don't have much time." Jorik's expression hardened. "We know, and we've been preparing for this. The warlord won't stop until he has what he wants. But we have a plan, a way to fight back." Ethan's eyes flickered between Lyra and Jorik. "What's the plan?" Jorik sat back down, motioning for them to do the same. "We've been gathering resistance groups across the galaxy. We've been setting up safe zones, places where we can regroup and strike back. But we're running out of time. The warlord's forces are growing stronger." Ethan leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "We need you to help us unite the resistance," Jorik said. "The Zalcor are the key to stopping the warlord. Their power, combined with our forces, could turn the tide. But we need to find the remaining Zalcor. There are others who have escaped his grasp, and if we can find them, we'll have a real chance at winning this war." Ethan's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. They weren't just running anymore. They were going to fight. They were going to take the battle to the warlord. But as Jorik's words settled in, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, would they have enough time? The warlord's forces were already closing in on them. Every moment they spent planning was another moment the enemy was getting closer. Lyra placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, her eyes filled with quiet resolve. "We're in this together now. No turning back." Ethan nodded. He had no intention of turning back. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady. "Let's bring down the warlord." The Cinder hummed with energy as it sat docked at the resistance station. The dim lights of the station flickered, casting long shadows across the worn walls. Outside, the stars continued their silent dance in the endless void. Inside, however, there was no peace. Every corner of the station buzzed with activity as resistance members hurried about, preparing for the fight of their lives. Ethan stood beside Lyra as they watched the soldiers move. They were assembling ships, loading weapons, and running simulations for the coming battle. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a shared determination in the air, a feeling that they were no longer running. They were preparing to strike back. Lyra turned to Ethan, her face hard. "This is it. We'll need every ally we can find. The warlord's forces are already on the move. We don't have much time." Ethan nodded. Where do we start? We start by contacting the other resistance groups. Jorik's voice interrupted. He appeared behind them, his face grim but resolute. We need to unite every force we can. The warlords' armies are numerous. But if we join forces, we might have a chance. Ethan glanced at Lyra. How do we get them to trust us? Jorik smiled faintly. They don't have to trust us. They just need to know that the warlord is the real enemy. They'll understand that soon enough. But first, we need to make contact with the leaders. I've already sent out the signals. We'll see who answers. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to wrap his head around the gravity of the situation. He was no longer just a transporter. He was part of a resistance movement, a movement that could potentially change the fate of the galaxy. But with every new piece of information, the stakes grew higher. The warlord wasn't just a tyrant. He was a force that could swallow entire civilizations, and their mission was nothing short of stopping him. Before Ethan could respond, the communications console beeped, signaling an incoming transmission. Jorik moved to answer it, his fingers flying over the controls. Captain Jorik. A voice crackled through the speaker. This is Captain Tessa from the Blight Star. We're ready to join forces. What's the plan? Jorik's eyes lit up, and he responded quickly. We're assembling a strike force to intercept the warlord's supply lines. We'll need all the ships you can spare. We're ready, Captain Tessa replied. We've been fighting the warlord's forces for years. We know his tactics. We'll follow your lead. Ethan could see the relief in Jorik's eyes as he ended the transmission. That's one down, he said, turning back to Lyra and Ethan. Now we need to get the others on board. Lyra's jaw tightened. How much time do we have before the warlord's forces arrive? Jorik looked at the clock on the wall, his expression unreadable. They're already within range. If we don't act fast, we'll be out of time. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The time for planning was over. Now, they needed to act. He turned to Lyra. What's our next move? Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip strong. We find the rest of the Talakor, and we stop the warlord. Together. The Cinder zoomed through space, now accompanied by several ships from the Resistance fleet. Ethan sat at the helm, his hand steady on the controls as he guided them toward their next target, a hidden planet where the next group of Talakor survivors was said to be hiding. The Resistance fleet was scattered across the galaxy, but with each contact made, their forces grew stronger. As they approached the planet, the sense of urgency grew. The warlord's forces were closing in on them, and they could feel the pressure building. Ethan's mind raced as he wondered just how many more surprises lay ahead. The Resistance had only begun to unite, and they still didn't have a full picture of the warlord's plans. The planet came into view, its surface shrouded in a layer of thick clouds. The scanners didn't pick up any signs of life at first, but that didn't mean much. The planet was remote, far from the galactic centers of power. It could easily be hiding more than it appeared. Ethan slowed the ship, the Cinder creeping toward the planet's atmosphere. The dark clouds rolled across the sky, making the planet look even more ominous. It was as if the very planet itself was holding its breath. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes locked on the screen. This is it, she said, her voice quiet. The last hope of my people. Ethan could feel the weight of her words. The Xalcor were the key to stopping the warlord, and this was their chance to gather more allies in their fight. They couldn't afford to fail. Suddenly, the communication system crackled to life. Cinder, this is Commander Valter of the Xalcor. You're in our territory. What do you want? Ethan's heart raced. They had found them. Jorik quickly opened a channel. We've come for your help. The warlord is hunting your people. We need your strength to fight back. There was a long pause before Commander Valter responded. We don't trust outsiders. The warlord has already destroyed so many of our kind. Lyra stepped forward, her voice firm but respectful. We're not outsiders. We're the last hope for the galaxy. If we don't fight together, the warlord will destroy everything. Your people's strength is the key. There was a moment of silence. Then, Commander Valter's voice came back, softer this time. I will speak with my people. Prepare to land. Ethan exhaled slowly, a feeling of cautious relief washing over him. They had made contact. Now they would have to convince the Xalcor to join the fight. But deep down, Ethan knew that even if they gained the Xalcor's trust, the hardest part was still ahead of them. The warlord would stop at nothing to crush them, and they had to be ready. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin. The Cinder hovered in orbit above the hidden Xalcor homeworld, the vast expanse of space stretching out before them like an infinite canvas. Below, the clouds of the planet churned in a thick, unyielding blanket. The atmosphere seemed heavy, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was tense, yet determined. Ethan sat at the controls, his fingers hovering over the console. His thoughts were a whirlwind of uncertainty and resolve. They had finally united the resistance forces, people from every corner of the galaxy, each one with their own reason for fighting. Now they had to prove that their combined strength could be enough to take on the warlord and his terrifying army. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the planet below. She was the last of her kind, the last of the Xalcor, and this was her home, her people's last stronghold. She had spent years in hiding, running from the warlord, and now, after all this time, they had an opportunity to strike back. "We have one chance at this," Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had fought for. "If we fail here, there won't be another chance." Ethan turned to face her, nodding. "We won't fail. We have the resistance. We have the Xalcor. We have each other." Her lips quirked upward in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You're right. Let's make it count." Suddenly, the communication console beeped, and Captain Jorik's voice crackled over the speakers. "This is it. The warlord's fleet is approaching. We don't have much time before they realize what we're up to. It's time to move out." Ethan's heart raced. The warlord had always been the one chasing them, but now it was their turn. They were going to face him head-on. The fleet of resistance ships began to move, breaking through the atmosphere and flying toward the warlord's incoming fleet. Every ship was an embodiment of the courage, the fear, and the hope of those who had joined this cause. For the first time, they were no longer hiding. They were fighting. As the Cinder descended toward the planet's surface, Ethan's mind raced. He was no soldier. He wasn't trained for this kind of battle. But his role was clear. Get the Xalcor into position, protect them, and keep fighting until the warlord was defeated. The landing was quick, and they were greeted by the Xalcor forces, warriors who were just as deadly as they were determined. The air was thick with tension as the Xalcor gathered their weapons and prepared for the final battle. Commander Valter, a large and imposing figure, approached Lyra and Ethan. "We're ready," Valter said, his deep voice carrying the weight of his experience. "We will fight until our last breath if we have to. The warlord will pay for what he has done to our people." Lyra met his gaze. "We fight together. We fight for the future of all our people. We'll take down the warlord and his empire." Ethan watched as the Xalcor warriors moved into position, forming ranks. Their battle cry echoed across the planet as they prepared for the final assault. Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was more than a fight for survival. This was a fight for the freedom of every world, every race that had been crushed under the warlord's heel. The communication system buzzed again, and Jorik's voice came through, calm but urgent. "We've got incoming. The warlord's fleet has arrived. Brace yourselves." Ethan didn't have time to respond. He grabbed his gear, and Lyra followed suit. Together, they joined the front lines with the Xalcor warriors. The battle was about to begin. The first wave of the warlord's forces came crashing down, ships descending from the sky like a swarm of deadly insects. Laser fire lit up the sky, and explosions rocked the surface of the planet. Ethan fired his blaster, heart pounding, as he fought back the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. The battle was chaos, but in the chaos, there was hope. Lyra fought beside him, her Xalcor strength and agility making her a blur of motion as she cut through the enemy lines. Her focus was unbreakable, her eyes locked on the warlord's forces as if she could already see their inevitable defeat. The resistance fleet engaged the warlord's ships above the planet, a vicious dogfight erupting in the skies. The Cinder fired its weapons, taking out one of the warlord's larger ships. Ethan felt a surge of triumph, but the victory was short-lived as the warlord's forces responded with overwhelming firepower. "We need to push them back." Jorik's voice came over the comms, but it was almost drowned out by the deafening noise of the battle. Ethan fought with everything he had. He could see the fear in the eyes of the resistance fighters and the Xalcor, but there was something else too. Determination. They were fighting for a future they had never thought possible. They were fighting for a future where the warlord's tyranny no longer ruled. As the battle raged on, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The warlord's forces were relentless, but they were beginning to falter. For every ship they destroyed, more resistance fighters arrived. For every soldier they lost, more stood in their place. It wasn't enough to win this battle. It was the will to survive, to resist, that would carry them through. Finally, after hours of brutal combat, the warlord's flagship appeared on the horizon, its enormous shape casting a shadow over the battlefield. It was time to face him. Lyra turned to Ethan, her face hard. "We finish this now. Together." Ethan nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. This was it, the final showdown. They made their way to the front lines, the air thick with the smell of smoke and the sounds of the dying battle. They were going to take down the warlord, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had suffered under his reign. Together, they charged forward, ready to face the warlord in the heart of his empire. They had nothing left to lose, but they had everything to fight for.